understand the sequence of events that transpired in Villisca, Iowa, during the early summer of 1912. One must first examine the structural and demographic realities of the municipality at that time. According to census data and municipal maps from the era, Villisca was a thriving hub within Montgomery County, situated at the intersection of the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy railroads. The town supported a population of approximately 2,000 individuals, a number that swelled during daylight hours due to the commercial traffic generated by the railway. It was a community defined by its connectivity and its commerce. Yet the residential sectors maintained a quiet, grid-like orderliness. The residence in question, occupied by the Moore family, stood at 508 East 2nd Street. Property records describe a white, two-story frame house, modest in architectural complexity, but substantial enough to house Josiah Moore, his wife Sarah, and their 4 children, Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and Paul. The location of the property is significant to the procedural analysis of the case. It was situated near the edge of the town, closer to the open countryside than the commercial center, a factor that would later complicate the analysis of potential escape routes used by the perpetrator. The timeline of the primary incident is anchored to the evening of Sunday, June 9th, 1912. Meteorological records from that date indicate the weather was mild, typical for early summer in the Midwest, with cloud cover that would have obscured moonlight later in the night. The community focus that evening was the Children's Day service held at the Presbyterian Church. Church logs and witness statements corroborate that the entire Moore family was in attendance. The service, an annual event involving recitations and hymns by the local youth, concluded at approximately 9:30 in the evening. Investigators later reconstructed the family's movements following the service based on testimony from multiple attendees. At this point in the investigation, the timeline becomes granular. The Moores did not return to their residence immediately alone. They were accompanied by 2 young guests, Lena and Anais Stillinger, who were friends of the Moore children. The Stillinger sisters had planned to stay overnight at the Moore residence because their own family home was located in the rural outskirts, too far for a safe return at that late hour. Witnesses placed the group of 8 walking from the church toward East 2nd Street between 9:45 and 10 o'clock. There is no record of any deviation from their usual route. No reports exist of any individuals approaching the family during this transit, nor were there any indications of distress. The group arrived at the residence and, based on the state of the home, discovered the following day. They followed a routine closing of the day. The locking mechanisms on the doors were engaged, and the window shades were drawn, though on every pane. The internal timeline of the house ceases shortly after 10 o'clock, based on the digestive analysis performed later by the coroner. The occupants prepared for sleep almost immediately upon entering the structure. There is no evidence of a late meal or significant activity after their arrival. The house fell silent. The neighbors, specifically Mary Peckham, who lived adjacent to the Moore property, reported hearing no unusual acoustic disturbances during the night. There were no shouts, no sounds of forced entry, and no barking from neighborhood dogs, which suggests that whoever entered the premises did so with a degree of stealth or familiarity that failed to rouse the suspicion of the surrounding residents. The procedural breakdown of the case began the following morning, Monday, June 10th. At 7:30 in the morning, Mary Peckham noted the absence of activity at the Moore residence. According to her statement given to authorities, it was uncharacteristic for the Moore family to remain indoors at such an hour. Josiah Moore was a businessman involved in farm implements and was known for his early adherence to a work schedule. The livestock chores had not been attended to, and the house remained closed against the morning air. Concerned by the silence, Peckham approached the residence and knocked on the door. Receiving no response, she attempted to open the door, but found it locked from the inside. She then contacted Ross Moore, Josiah's brother, at approximately 8 o'clock. This communication log marks the beginning of the formal timeline of discovery. Ross Moore arrived shortly thereafter. His initial attempts to rouse the family by shouting and knocking were unsuccessful. At this stage, Ross Moore produced a key set. He successfully unlocked the front door and entered the parlor. He did not proceed to the upper level immediately. Instead, he opened the door to a downstairs bedroom, which was occupied by the two Stillinger sisters. Upon looking into the room, Ross Moore exited the house immediately and instructed Mary Peckham to contact the local peace officer. Marshal Henry Horton arrived at the location shortly before 8:30. Marshal Horton entered the structure and conducted a primary sweep. According to the marshal's initial notes, he located 8 individuals within the residence. All 8 had sustained fatal injuries. The 2 Stillinger sisters were in the downstairs bedroom. Upstairs, in the master bedroom, Josiah and Sarah Moore were found. The 4 more children were located in the adjacent upstairs bedroom. The primary cause of the fatalities was determined to be blunt force trauma inflicted by a heavy instrument. The instrument itself, a long-handled tool belonging to Josiah Moore, was located by Marshal Horton in the room occupied by the Stillinger sisters. It had been left leaning against the wall. Investigators noted that the implement had been partially wiped clean, though biological residue remained in the crevices of the metal head. blade was covered in coal dust, suggesting it had been retrieved from the coal shed in the backyard prior to the incident. Beside the tool, a piece of slab bacon was found on the floor, wrapped in a cloth. This bizarre detail was recorded in the evidence log, but baffled investigators, as it seemed to serve no functional purpose in the commission of the act. A 2-pound piece of iron wrapped in cloth was also recovered near the bed in the downstairs room. The condition of the interior presented a confusing array of data points. There was no sign of a struggle. None of the chairs were overturned, and no items appeared to be broken during a physical altercation. This led investigators to conclude that the individuals were approached while they slept. Furthermore, the perpetrator had taken time to cover the faces of the individuals with bedclothes or clothing items found in the rooms. The mirrors in the bedrooms had also been covered with cloth, and the glass panes in the entry doors were similarly obscured. This behavior, clinically referred to as remorse or depersonalization, suggested a psychological profile that was inconsistent with a simple robbery or a crime of opportunity. Additional scrutiny of the scene revealed meticulous manipulation of the environment. A kerosene lamp was discovered at the foot of the bed in the parents' room. The chimney of the lamp had been removed and placed under a dresser, while the wick had been bent back. Investigators surmised this was done to minimize the light output, allowing the intruder to navigate the home with a dim flame that would not alert neighbors. A second lamp was found at the top of the stairs in a similar condition. A gouge mark was identified in the ceiling above the bed, where Josiah and Sarah Moore lay. This mark correlated with the upward swing of the heavy implement, indicating the height of the arc used by the perpetrator. The presence of this mark suggested that the ceiling height had constrained the movement of the tool. In the kitchen, investigators found a plate of food and a bowl containing water with a red substance in it. This indicated the perpetrator may have washed their hands before leaving. A plate of food remained untouched on the table. These domestic details painted a picture of a methodical, unhurried exit. However, the integrity of the location was compromised almost immediately. As news of the discovery spread through the telephone exchange and word of mouth, a crowd began to gather at the property. In a profound failure of protocol, the perimeter was not secured. Records indicate that between the hours of 9 in the morning and noon, dozens, perhaps nearly 100 curious townspeople entered the house. These individuals walked through the hallways, peered into the rooms, and in some cases, touched items within the residence. They tracked mud and debris from the yard into the house, obliterating any potential footprint evidence on the floorboards. Any possibility of lifting latent fingerprints, a technology technology that was in its infancy, but available in larger metropolitan areas, was rendered impossible by the sheer volume of handling the surfaces received. By the time the county coroner arrived and a formal inquest was organized, the location had been fundamentally altered. The specific placement of small objects, the exact positioning of the door latches, and the dust patterns on the floor had been disturbed by the unregulated foot traffic. The investigation was forced to rely on the recollections of Marshal Horton and Ross Moore regarding the initial state of the doors and windows. Horton stated that all points of entry were locked. This detail is critical. It implies that the person responsible either possessed a key or had entered the home prior to the family locking up for the night, concealing themselves in a closet or attic space. A subsequent search of the attic revealed cigarette butts, which were collected as evidence, suggesting that someone may have waited in that confined space. However, due to the contamination of the scene, it was impossible to definitively link the cigarettes to a specific time frame or individual. The medical examiner's review of the individuals commenced later that day. Dr. J. Clark Cooper and Dr. F.S. Williams established the medical timeline based on rigor mortis and the stage of digestion found during the autopsies. The medical examiners estimated the time of the incident to be shortly after midnight. The stomach contents of the victims revealed that supper had been fully digested, placing the fatal event several hours after their return from the church service, while 7 of the 8 sustained injuries that likely resulted in immediate incapacitation. The report for Lena Stillinger noted a discrepancy. The position of her form suggested she may have moved slightly after the initial trauma. A defensive mark on her arm was discussed in later inquests, implying she might have awakened moments before the impact. By Monday afternoon, the scope of the investigation expanded beyond the physical structure of the house. Investigators began to look at the departures from the town. Train records from the Burlington line were scrutinized. A train had departed Villisca at 5:19 in the morning. Conductors were interviewed regarding any passengers who appeared agitated or who boarded at the last minute. This line of inquiry was complicated by the fact that Villisca was a transit hub. Transients and railway workers moved through the station daily. Bloodhounds were brought in from Nebraska, arriving on Tuesday morning. However, the delay in their deployment was critical. By the time the dogs were brought to the location, 24 hours had passed, and the ground had been trampled by the hundreds of townspeople. The dogs initially picked up a scent that led them out of the back door, through the garden, and toward the Nottoway River. However, the trail was lost at the water's edge. This supported the theory that the perpetrator may have washed themselves or disposed of evidence in the river. But no physical items were recovered from the water at that time. The investigation fractured into distinct theories, driven by separate investigative bodies. The first line of inquiry focused on a local businessman and state senator, Frank Jones. Records show a significant history of animosity between Jones and Josiah Moore. They were business rivals in the farm implement trade, and Moore had recently left Jones's employ to start a competing firm, taking a lucrative franchise with him. There were also rumors regarding personal disputes involving Jones's family. The theory posited that the senator had hired an individual to carry out the act, but no physical evidence ever linked Jones to the scene. A second primary suspect was a traveling minister named Lynn George Jacqueline Kelly. Kelly was present at the church service the Moore family attended on the night of June 9th. Witnesses described him as agitated and eccentric. He left town on an early train the following morning. During the investigation, it was discovered that Kelly had sent a shirt to a laundry service in a neighboring town shortly after the incident. Investigators seized the garment, but the analysis was inconclusive. Kelly had a history of mental instability and had been sending letters to the police discussing the case in intimate detail. Years later, he signed a confession stating that a divine voice commanded him to act, but he recanted almost immediately, claiming coercion. A jury subsequently acquitted him. The file also contains references to a serial offender theory involving a man named William Mansfield. Investigators noted that the method of entry and the nature of the injuries in Villisca bore a striking resemblance to other incidents in Colorado and Kansas. A detective from the Burns Agency built a case around Mansfield, producing witnesses who claimed to have seen him boarding a train in a nearby town on the morning of June 10th. However, payroll records from a workplace in Illinois placed Mansfield hundreds of miles away on the date in question. This alibi, though contested, prevented a successful prosecution. Ultimately, the investigation was defined by its procedural errors. The failure to secure the location within the first hour allowed for the destruction of footprints and the introduction of foreign fingerprints. The reliance on conflicting eyewitness testimony regarding the identity of strangers in town created a confused timeline. The keys to the Moore house were never found, leading investigators to speculate the perpetrator took them. Yet, this lead never yielded a suspect. The tangible record ends where the crowd crossed the threshold, leaving investigators to sift through a corrupted dataset. The legal conclusion remains open, with the deaths of the 8 individuals classified as unsolved, and the file suspended in a permanent state of procedural limbo.